Many know about slavery, but few discuss paper genocide. We did not all come from Africa, and most of us have Aboriginal roots that were stripped away due to reclassification and miseducation. As a native Black American and a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation, I understand the importance of tracing your lineage. If you want to learn how to trace your genealogy and apply for tribal citizenship, go to nativeblackancestry.com to schedule a consultation.
They don't want you to remember this. You not no slave, you indigenous. Fuck how they painted them Indians. You went to war with the French and the British, man. Quite frankly, you was kings, Merovingians. They took the women and men, made them prisoners. Raised up the children to worship their images. Set up a lab to the genes and they mixed them. And this shit get way deeper than your pigment.
All right. We are back again. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, make sure to smash the like button on the way in. Likes are free after all. Subscribe to the channel if you've yet to do so. And check out the website, nativeblackancestry.com. That is a labor of love for me. As a genealogist, I've worked to take a lot of primary sources, a lot of genealogical resources, and put them on that website to help you in your journey of discovery. So definitely make sure to check out the website, nativeblackancestry.com. As a thank you for checking out the website, you can download a free copy of my ebook, Reclassified, The Hidden History of Black Indians in the Southeast from Indian to Negro. So definitely make sure to check out the website, nativeblackancestry.com. And if you need personalized guidance with genealogy research, you can even access my calendar, pick a day and time, and connect with me one-on-one, where I teach the 3-step process that me and my family use to trace our heritage and get tribal citizenship with the Muskogee Creek Nation back in 2021. But guys, this broadcast is going to be a good one. Boy, oh boy, is this broadcast going to be a good one. Let's go ahead and set the stage for you. You see, right now, we're stepping into one of the biggest lies that were ever told on American soil. When people tell the story of New York, the melting pot, the immigrant city, the land purchased for $24 worth of beads, they never mention the people who were already there. They never mention the people who weren't Africans, weren't slaves, weren't mulattoes, but indigenous Black Americans who had been living, governing, farming, trading, and defending that land for centuries. Tonight, we're talking about the true ownership of New York and the deliberate reclassification and removal of the native Black nations who lived there. This isn't just about Manhattan. This isn't about the Hudson Valley. This is about Long Island. This is about Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, Newark, Harlem, all of it. Before it became a colonial port, it was indigenous Black land. Now, I want you to ask yourself something. Why does American history go out of its way to teach you about the Dutch, teach you about the British, teach you about the Irish, the Italians, but they never teach you about the people who were here already when all of them showed up? Why is that? Why is it that all across the East Coast, whenever colonizers arrived, they mysteriously ran into dark-skinned indigenous populations, but somehow by the 1800s, those same people magically transform into Negroes? Why do you think that happened? I mean, it wasn't evolution, it wasn't migration, it wasn't some mixed race fairy tale. It was policy. It was intentional. It was deliberate. It was strategic. Because once you erase the people on paper, you erase their land rights. You erase their sovereignty. You erase their history. And that's exactly what happened in New York. Now, before Europeans arrived, this region was not empty wilderness. It was agricultural land, wampum manufacturing centers. It was maritime trade hubs, fortified villages, seasonal fishing camps, indigenous highways and canoe routes, complex political alliances stretching from Lenape territory into the southeast. And among these indigenous communities were Black indigenous tribes, communities whose skin color confused Europeans, whose culture didn't match their expectations, and whose identity became a threat to the colonial narrative. They were labeled Black Indians, River Negroes, Moors, Musties, Mulatto Natives. Over time, all of those labels were compressed into one word: Negro. And with that one label, their land titles evaporated. Let's talk about the so-called purchase of Manhattan. Everyone knows the story, right? The Dutch bought Manhattan from the Indians for beads and trinkets. But they never tell you the land wasn't legally theirs to sell. The Dutch didn't even understand the concept of communal indigenous land. The tribe the Dutch negotiated with didn't even live on Manhattan. The native black communities who did occupy Manhattan were reclassified and written out of the transaction. Because if the record shows Negroes, not natives, then suddenly they're not landowners. Suddenly your claim is invalid. Suddenly your homeland becomes someone else's real estate. That's the entire trick. European colonizers had no legal ground to take New York by force alone, so they followed the same formula they used in Virginia, Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Step 1, identify the native black population. Step 2, reclassify them as Negro. Step 3, declare them landless. Step 4, seize the land legally. Step 5, rewrite the story. The transformation from Lenape to colored, or Munsee to Negro, or Montauk to mulatto, that was not an accident. It was an administrative strategy. And by the 1700s, you see entire native black families listed on censuses as Negro householders, Negro laborers, or even free Negroes, even though their ancestors had signed treaties with the Dutch and wampum agreements with the English. By the 1800s, a whole people vanished on paper. The land didn't disappear. The people didn't disappear. They were renamed. They were reclassified. They were made victims of a process we now know as paper genocide. Look around New York today. Look around. Harlem, Brooklyn, Newark, Queens, Long Island. So many black families in those regions descend from the indigenous black tribes of that area. The same tribes that European and later American census takers reclassified to eliminate their legal standing. You cannot talk about gentrification, redlining, displacement, mass incarceration, the school to prison pipeline, without understanding that the very first displacement was this one: the removal of indigenous black people from their own land through racial reclassification. This is where the pattern starts. This is where the blueprint was drawn. Now, I've got a special co-host. I'm going to bring him up in just a moment, and he's going to break this whole thing down with precision. He's got a powerful presentation prepared, and I'll be jumping in throughout the conversation with commentary, questions, or connections back to the broader system of paper genocide that we expose on this channel. So take a breath, open your mind, because when we talk about the stealing of New York, we're not just talking about real estate. We're talking about identity theft, land theft, historical theft, the kind that shaped an entire country. Now, let's get into it. This is the truth about how New York was taken from Native Black Americans. And once again, we got to bring up the man of the hour, Handsome History. How you doing, brother?
Hey, good to see you, Mike. Good to be here.
Nice to see you again as well. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the people who aren't familiar with you and your work.
All right, yeah. You can check me out at the websites American Ancestry Decoded. I'm also on TikTok and YouTube that way now, and I also have I started the Forensic History Academy, which I'll be rolling out. American Ancestry Decoded, though, is focused on detailed investigative reports, site visits, all of it focused, though, on American history, in particular Black American Indian history, because it just turns up at every corner. So that's just what I focus on, and there's plenty of content with that focus.
Oh yeah.
You realize, yeah, it's just like, well, every stone I overturn. Oh, okay. So I'm not actually limiting myself, am I? So anyhow, so that's the focus of that, building up a big library and different levels of, 30 to 50 page investigations. I'm going to really put a lot in there. And then rolling out genealogy consultations as well as a part of that. And then with Forensic History Academy, for those who want to maybe get into being more methodical themselves, I'm actually going to create some courses and stuff. And so people who can, look at text the way I look at text, or go do a site visit in their county and look for the type of clues that I look for, and construct, the crime scene themselves, and come up with a theory of, what really went on here. And that's what it's about. That's what this is about. What the heck really happened, and documenting all of it.
Nice, sounds good. And it's my understanding that if folks go to your website, American Ancestry Decoded, put their email address in and click Access Report, then they can get a detailed breakdown on some of the history that you dive into, right?
Absolutely. This particular report's about the indigenous internet of agriculture. It's a good 15, 20 pages that goes into a lot of detail that I can't really put into a video.
Nice. Sounds good. Sounds good. And I know that your website is in its early stages, but over time, it sounds like you'll also be providing some genealogy consultations, which is very, very good because, I'm not a racist or anything, but when it comes to my genealogy work, I mean, it's in the name of the website, right? NativeBlackAncestry.com. I really focus on my own underserved community because we are really kept away from genealogical research. We're really kept away from understanding who our ancestors are, where we come from, our indigenous culture and whatnot. So I really focus on my community of Native Black Americans. But for those of you who are even viewers of mine that are of the European heritage or any other ethnic group, over time, once Handsome History gets these genealogy consultations going on his website, that's going to be a great source that I'm going to funnel you guys towards so that I can focus on my community of Native Black Americans while he can help the more general population who want to learn about whether their ancestors were fighting for the Confederacy or the Union, or what side of the what side of the Revolutionary War your ancestors were a part of, or how did your European ancestors actually get to Ellis Island? What countries did they migrate from? What situations were going on in Europe that forced them to come settle in the Americas, right? So, for anybody who is not a self-identifying or a person classified as a Black American, his website is going to be a great resource for genealogy. And whether you're a Black American or of a different ethnic group, everybody should go and download his free report because it's really jam-packed with a lot of good information. And real quick, before we get into this breakdown, we got to give a shout out to one of your viewers, Kiki. Kiki says, I found Mike through a Handsome History video. Well, shout out to Kiki.
Nice.
Appreciate you showing up. And guys, also make sure to check out Handsome History on YouTube. We're trying to get him to 1,000 subscribers over the weekend. I'm sure we can do it. So go ahead and subscribe to him on YouTube, Handsome History. But you have the floor. Go ahead and jump into it. I know you've done quite a bit of research into New York, what was going on at that time. And I think you even revealed some interesting situation where there's like a Black guy or like a Negro who's living in an area that's historically known as like the area of a chief or some kind of chiefdom. I'm not sure if you can elaborate on that more.
Oh, sure, man. This is great. So I call this one the stronghold of Maringamus. That's the chief name that they reference. So context, guys. So I'm reading through the Orange County, New York history. These counties, they have all these histories. They write their 100-year anniversary history. It's great stuff if you really want to get into detailed history. And in this one, in this little snippet, this little county book, I think this is from like 1888. It's talking about the bigwigs of town, and it comes up that there's this spot of land and it used to be the wigwam of Chief Maringamus. I'm like, okay, he's referencing this chief, interesting to reference this chief. And then it says, and now there's a colored man on it named so-and-so. And I'm like, well, how about that? Henry Page. So I'm like, so you got a colored man who lives at the property, owns a property that used to be the wigwam of a big chief named Maringamus. I got to look into this. So that's how this kind of comes to me, right? Let's go check into this a little bit, right? So in 1858, a local surveyor named George W. Tuttle sat down to write a letter about land patent boundaries in Blooming Grove, Orange County, New York. Guys, about an hour up the Hudson River from Manhattan. This wasn't a manifesto or a historical essay. This was a landman doing what landmen do. They track borders, names, and legal land anchor points. But without realizing it, he gave us a key. He writes that about half a mile below the village of Washingtonville on the northwestern bank of the Otterkill Stream, also known as Murderers Creek, sits a house owned by a colored man named Henry Page. But this isn't just any house. Tuttle says it plainly. This is the site of the wigwam of Maringamus. Now, Maringamus wasn't some forgotten figure. He was a known indigenous leader, a grantor in the early land transfers, and his wigwam, his residence, was so established, so well known, that colonial surveyors used his residence as a legal boundary marker for the Rip Van Dam patent, a 3,000-acre colonial land grant. Let that sink in. 1750s. When these counties were being carved up by investors and land syndicates, they weren't mapping untouched New York wilderness. They were drawing lines from known indigenous strongholds and recording them in their own legal documents. So this isn't lore. This is in the official ledger. And in 1858, over 150 years after first contact in New York, that land was still occupied, still inhabited, not by settlers, but by a colored man with no church affiliation, living exactly where the indigenous chief's home had always been. Surveyor Tuttle wasn't trying to expose anything. He was just doing his job. And in doing it, he dropped something priceless, a direct, verifiable link between Maringamus' sovereign territory and a living descendant holding ground as late as 1858. Castle on the mountain. Maringamus didn't just have a wigwam on the floodplain. According to the History of Orange County, New York, published in 1881, a book published by local civic elites with no agenda to glorify Indians, they say Maringamus also had a castle. They use that exact word. And his castle sat on the northern end of Schunemunk Mountain, a ridge towering above Otterkill Valley. And from this mountain, he could oversee Washingtonville, the Cloves to the south, the Hudson Highlands to the east, and every ridge, bend, and trail in between. This was real strategic architecture. And in times of peace, this Maringamus must have lived on the fertile valley plain. And in times of war, withdrew to these mountain heights, a fallback redoubt, exactly the model used in other societies. And here's what takes it further. His name wasn't even a personal name at all. It seems like it was actually a title. That means the wigwam and the castle weren't just like his homes. They were actually the symbols of office. In other words, an infrastructure of power, a government. And he was a territorial sovereign, anchoring a legal geography that even the colonial land patents had to reference. That's power. Paper games and patent strategy. But here's where we start seeing how indigenous land got overwritten, not just taken. From 1671 to 1739, nearly a dozen land transactions occur under the phonetic variations of this name, Maringamus. We got Maringamak, Maringaman, Masinganik, and a few more, all taking place in this area of Orange County. And these deeds include massive real estate tracts across Orange, Rockland, and Ulster counties. Land from Haverstraw to Hackensack, from Chesapeake to Kakiat, from Murderers Kill to Minising. These weren't isolated deals. These guys were in the system. So the colonial corporations were filing these like preemptive patents, these legal blueprints for future seizure, like planning ahead, decades ahead. When it finally happens, I have the patent on it. These documents reclaim tracts that weren't even accessible to the settlers yet. But once that land got cleared, by treaty, pressure, war. Now they can move in and activate the title, start getting the loans and the money flowing. This was the paper conquest. It's almost like the stock market in the frontier zone. Back in London, they were selling in the market these patents like as shares, the value going up and down. Some of these spellings: Maringamus, 1685. He sells land from the dancing chamber to murderer's kill. Then we have a Maringamus, 1696, sells a Kakiati patent. On and on, over 8 dozen, and that's just from finding one source. So what that shows is all the way through like the mid 1700s, you got these Indians wheeling and dealing in the system, and the colonial governments are respecting their boundaries. Hostages for land. There's a mention of this woman, Sarah Wells. In 1701, Governor Lord Bellomont of New York described the area west of the Hudson Highlands as, you guessed it, a wilderness, right? Uncivilized. But at the same time, colonial land patents were being filed in that very region, many of them overlapping with Chief Maringamus's domain. And among them was, get this, the Wawayanda patent. You mean Wawa? Like Wawas? Yeah, the Wawayanda patent, staked by trustees including Christopher Den. And one of his instruments for securing this Wawayanda patent was a young orphan girl. That's right, they admit to an orphan girl named Sarah Wells. And he uses her in order to get title to this patent. Sarah Wells, wasn't a settler heiress. She was a custodial hostage, a likely indigenous child renamed and reclassified, then placed under the guardianship of this Mr. Den. And she was physically led into this actual Otterkill territory by Indian guides in order to claim the land for him by proxy. Yeah, that's in the Orange County's own newspaper. This was a pattern. Indigenous children removed from their kin, given English surnames and a Christian sponsor. She doesn't even have the same last name as her custodial father. And then what has she done? They use her to anchor the land patents as resilient orphans. That's right, they called them resilient orphans. Sarah Wells was likely connected to the bloodlines of this Maringamus. She wouldn't have been alone. This strategy of orphan hostage deployment marries what the Dawes Act would later institutionalize: fractional land assignment via what? Guardianship. What about this Governor Lord Bellomont? He was part of the same dynastic trust family as the Belmonts, as in August Belmont later, the bankers and trustees whose names now adorn the Belmont Stakes horse track. The revolutionary turning point. This land was not forgotten during the American Revolution. Minisink and the surrounding Orange County terrain became a battleground. The famous Joseph Brant, a Mohawk war chief educated in British schools, hostage, and fluent in both native and Masonic codes, led coordinated raids in 1779. His campaign hit Minisink directly. Brant is typically framed as a loyalist ally of the British, but in the context, he appears more like a sovereignty enforcer, someone trying to prevent total erasure of the indigenous claims under the banner of American liberty. Major Wood, a captive from Orange County, New York, saved himself from execution using a Masonic sign, implying elite recognition among competing systems of authority. By 1783, many of the land claims Maringamus once anchored were now scorched, renegotiated, or defaulted into settler hands after the Revolution. Relabeling and reclassification. This process went hand in hand with something else: changing identities. Maringamus, a sovereign steward of a known jurisdiction, becomes a footnote. His descendants aren't listed as heirs. They're renamed. They become colored, free men of color. Henry Page, living on the same land in 1858, isn't recognized as indigenous. He's a black man, legally present but culturally cut off, a survivor relabeled. This wasn't a clerical accident. It was a gradual generational erasure. Some families were displaced by force, others sold under duress. Once labeled black, they lost their legal standing as native heirs. And by the 1890s, the Dawes Act would formalize this national pattern. So this story of Maringamus in New York isn't just about the past. It's kind of a roadmap for recovery. We could ask, what happened to the descendants of Henry Page? Could we find a chain of title linking Maringamus to Page? And where are the paper relics of all these title conversions? Where did these Indians go? Where did the 12 land patents go? So I just wanted to present this. It's an example of, I haven't been on site there. I have been in this area before. And I'm telling you, you can see maybe with the remnants of his castle, you can start to imagine how powerful the area was militarily. Actually, the United States Military Academy, West Point's located in this area. It's a very valuable area of the country, I guess is what I'm trying to tell you. That this chief, or under that name, Maringamus, was wheeling and dealing big lots of land all the way through about the 1750s. And it looks like after the revolution, a lot got dissolved. But still, as late as 1858, you have basically what they're calling a free person of color, Henry Page, still on site.
Wow, that's powerful. That's powerful. Hey, it's a lot to unpack there. Let's segue to a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're gonna go ahead and take it step by step.
Okay, you know what? I just wanted to just put this out there. This is my experience with Michael, getting my genealogy for my family, and it's been a great experience. You know, just learning from where my bloodline could be right here on American soil, just understanding the roots here, right here in America, could have so much in common with my bloodline. It's astounding. I mean, I have, my eyes have been open. You know, even if you're a person that don't do a lot of research on your genealogy, on your background, on your bloodline, being a so-called African American, this is a great start. If you need any type of information, if you just want to know a little bit about your history, where you come from, anything, this is a great start, because you know, just being a person of color, and having stories flipped on you, not knowing exactly who to reach to, or not knowing exactly what foundation to go through. This is the perfect start right here. Just knowing that there's somebody that got your back, somebody that's willing to take those steps to get you to know, not the fable, not the fiction, but the honest to God truth. So I definitely encourage all my peers, all my peoples out there to get involved and to find out exactly where you come from. This is a great start. So I encourage all my peoples to, you know what I'm saying, look into your genealogy and start with Michael. Michael's a great person, and he's going to definitely lead you the right way.
Let's talk about it, guys. Real people, real results. What are you waiting for? Go to nativeblackancestry.com if you need assistance with genealogy research or would like to access the tons of historical information I've built on the website. But Travis, let's go ahead and break this down, because the first thing that comes to mind is you're saying that there's a colored man who coincidentally is living in the same exact spot that a chief was known to live at. And you know what this reminds me of? Have you ever heard of the, and I don't call it this, they call this a burlesque coon song, and it's called A Great Big Chickapoo Chief. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
I'm gonna blow your mind right now. Check this shit out right here. You're basically saying, hey, I'm doing research about New York, the area, and well, there's a colored dude who lives in the exact same, but basically he lives in the house of where the previous chief lived, right? Well,
I gotta check this out, right?
Well, in that same vein, you'll see how when you listen to this burlesque coon song, they give a lot of secret gems. They give a lot of secret gems. Check this out. This is gonna blow your mind. So this right here is the image of it. A great big Chickapoo chief. You've got the black man in a big headdress. You've got him being unmasked in court in front of a judge, right? Well, wait until you hear these lyrics. A great big Chickapoo chief. Let's jump on into it. It says right here, this is a burlesque Indian coon song. Not just a burlesque coon song. This is a burlesque Indian coon song. Okay, interesting. Interesting category we've got here. Check out these lyrics. In Montana, a wild and woolly lived a foxy coon. He dressed up just like an Indian on the night in June. When the silvery moon was peeping, silently this coon was creeping to a chicken coop nearby. Suddenly, he heard a cry. Down the farmers came, a weeping. Soon they had the chieftain weeping, landed him in jail, and there they heard him wail. I ain't no chicken thief, I'm a great big heap much chickapoo chief. But that's not it, guys. Here's the next line. To the court next morn, they brought him, famous Indian chief, told the judge just how they caught him, common chicken thief. Said the judge, make your story shorter, bring a sponge and a pail of water. Wash the mighty chieftain's face, Lord, to think of such disgrace. There he stood, the colored preacher, most distinct in every feature. Judge gave him 10 years as he yelled out through his tears, I ain't no chicken thief, I'm a great big heap much chickapoo chief. When you see me, you see the king of my race. My Indian name is Rain in the Face. When I found that bird, he was sure enough dead. I was going to pluck the feathers just to wear them on my head. Don't be absurd. Can't you take my word? I'm a great big chickapoo chief. What do you think about that, Travis?
Well, the first thing is you find a lot of great reveals in like literature, poetry. So it's like, I mean, I've never, like I said, that's new. I've never even heard of chickapoo and stuff. And I'm like, wait, so he's basically, it just shows you how they go back and forth. Like you can, I guess he's like living in both worlds. So you can be a chief, right? You can be a chickapoo, but then you can over here, you got to be, a little.
And mind you, I don't believe Chickapoo is an actual tribe or anything. This is just something that the European settlers threw in there because it sounds Indian, right? But if you get to the underlying basis of it, we have someone who's classified by colonial society as a colored preacher, but at night he goes out in his tribal regalia and he's saying in court, I'm a chief.
Yeah, it's the whole double, right? So I'm saying like they somehow, right? And I'm trying to actually learn more about how much that really went on. I mean, he might be just doing that because you had Chickasaw, Chickamauga, you know what I mean? He might be just, it's the chick for all.
Kickapoo, yeah.
But it does remind me a little bit of this Yankeezy thread I've been on, where you see that guys convert, but then the next thing you know, they want to go back and live among the tribe. And that's this thing that's really documented, having a foot in both worlds, especially these hostage ones, right? So they get indoctrinated, they come out at like 21, they get redeployed, but they're going to have mixed emotions, right? They're going
to and talk about that, because you mentioned in the previous broadcast how Harvard was created as an Indian conversion center. And essentially what they did is they took Indian chiefs hostage and reprogrammed their children to, instead of being Indian chiefs, to be preachers, Christian preachers.
Right. Or they would go back and be the chief, but they would be a chief that's going to do their bidding. So this is, it gets it, and I've seen it now in New England and in Virginia. So now I know, it was going on. That was the program, and it's really intriguing because what they would do is get them between age 2 and 7, and they'd keep them till like 18 or 21 at least. And they're living in like these mansions and stuff, right? So it's like this really odd situation, or they're living at these universities, right? And they're in like a boarding school, they're eating fine dinners, so to speak. but what's really going on, right? And like you realize like, oh, that was like part of the program, and then you start doing that to a couple thousand a year or more, and like you're really putting together a team. Yeah, and that's their job, and they're coming back, but then they're living in both worlds, and some go back. They want to. Yeah, it's a whole thing, and it was definitely heavily talked about and documented in the early years.
And you know what? I've got a question for you, because when it comes to this research you were doing on New York, you're saying, hey, I'm not even really looking for anything related to Black Indians. I'm just looking at colonial history. And next thing you know, I got a colored guy living basically in the home of a chief, right? Do you remember when you first experienced that in general? I mean, I know that you originally didn't set out to learn about the racial reclassification of Native Black Americans or anything, but do you remember back to what the first thing it was that you were researching, and the first time you came across this connection and realized that Black Americans descend from reclassified American Indians?
Yeah, I think the first time I really, I've listened to so many people. I think I heard. It's not, I heard it and I had the idea in my head. I thought, okay, I'm open to this possibility now, right? And so then I'm continuing my own little thing. And then I realized, wow, man, like the documentation on Africans, it's so low. The numbers, okay, now I'm really believing, okay. And then it really just fell into place. I think really reading some stuff about slavery in the South did it to me, where I was like, wait a second, man, like these guys have like protections, and like, there was like this whole thing that I was like, wait a second, this makes a lot more sense if that they were enslaved in place. Like it came to me like that was a phrase I must have heard of somewhere. I was like, wait, this makes a lot more sense if, what these other guys are saying, and then what the numbers are showing me, you got to fill the gap with the originals, like, because the Africans are not enough. So it's like, okay. And it just, to me, I think reading about how slavery really was going on, and how like they had their own property, and guys would buy their their manumissions with like an extra 2 months of work. These dudes, like
how some of them would leave the plantation and hire out their time and give taxes back to their slave master. Like
it was just like they're running the thing. Wait, what's going on? Then it's just like I was like, wait a second, man. Like, okay, so they're Indians until they're working for a colonial company. Now they're called a slave. Got it. Or they're hostage after their parent, they're become an orphan. So you hear them called an orphan. Orphan is actually a hostage that they're going to be assigned. You start to realize these different labels going on. And then, the Negro is the one that's not enslaved, not on a reservation. He's sort of sometimes also your free person of color. They're like, they don't know what to do with that guy, because he might be a horse trader. He might have his own thing going on, but so they, okay, wow, now we got to try and make sense of all this. Because it's like 4 or 5 people.
So if I understand correctly, you heard maybe out there on social media some content creators promoting the notion that Black Americans could be indigenous to America and not products of a West African slave trade, right? I mean, none of us are doubting slavery existed in America. Some of us do our genealogy and we find ancestors that were enslaved, but they didn't come from Africa. They were enslaved in place. And it sounds like you've heard these notions. You had an open mind to it. And the first thing that you said that you really sought literature on, research receipts on, was the African slave trade. And you really couldn't find a whole lot of empirical evidence that really suggested that enough African slaves were shipped to North America specifically to make up for the 45 million plus Black Americans we have today. And truth be told, if it wasn't for eugenics, who's the lady who did Planned Parenthood and all that?
Right.
What's her name again? I mean, if it wasn't for Planned Parenthood aborting so many babies, if it wasn't for mass incarceration, if it wasn't for the war on drugs, putting drugs in our community, we would probably be closer to 100 million just in North America alone. So it sounds like you don't really find evidence of an African slave trade that can make up our demographic. And then you start to look into slavery in the South, and you see slavery in the South was actually way more nuanced than they teach you in school, and that the slaves were kind of in control of everything, and they're teaching the master how to do stuff. And some slaves have a decent working relationship and they're living fairly well, and some of them have an evil master and they're getting beat like it's, you know, the Roots movie or something, but it's much more nuanced than they taught us in school. And of course it makes sense because the South was invaded by the North and history is written by the victor. So of course the North is going to paint the South as these terrible, really bad people, but the North was really no better. Right after the Civil War, 1865, we get the KKK, 1865. We get black massacres all across the U.S., which Union soldiers turned a blind eye to. I mean, if anybody looks at this map right here, the same area that we've got these black indigenous tribes in the Southeast, look at all these black massacres. And if you look at the dates, they're all post-Civil War. So, you know, when you see how nuanced it is, when you start to be privy to the term enslavement in place, when you start to see the colonial classifications and how there's Negroes, there's coloreds, there's Indians, there's Negro Indians, there's free people of color, there's slaves. Well, if these folks were from Africa, guess what? They would have called them Africans. And they would have kept calling them Africans. And they would have never called them anything other than an African. But our ancestors didn't get called African at all until 1988, courtesy of Jesse Jackson.
I mean, that's, I mean, you can see, so they're called Indians in the 1500s through most of the 1600s. And then clearly in the 1700s, like they had a big meeting and you're like, all right, in all the books that you write, if they're not on a reservation or they're not an independent tribe still, right? If they're working as a slave, or basically they're kind of just like in no man's land, because then you had a lot that were just like, you know, just still kind of free, right? Then we're calling them Negro. It's like the Negro word starts getting used a lot. But it's interesting though to note that they don't say from, like, Africa is not. So at the beginning, it's just Negro, and then you start to see more, like, to me, it's around the Civil War, in the middle of the 1800s, as you see this, you know, they're from Africa, and I believe a lot of that starts to become a part of what all the propaganda as it lead up to the war, I think, but then certainly after that war, you know, anybody writing history from Harvard is gonna like insist that all the slaves are African, and
real quick, and that's also where Walter Plecker Racial Integrity Act comes in. They literally removed Indian from the race category, and they said that you are not Indian unless you live on a reservation.
Yeah, so that's the big right. I have try to explain that so that's where they really formalize it. So you see that in the culture in the mid 1800s. So the press is on, you know, and then they win the Civil War. Now they can do whatever they want. You got like a small faction in charge, and you see what they did. You got the black codes everywhere. KKK's allowed. Yeah. You just see, right? We all know what happened. That's all them. That's one group running the guys that won the Civil War brought you the Dolls Act.
And would you agree that really the Civil War was all about the North coming in and stealing this system that the South had? Because in my experience, they basically took this managerial corporate system and put it in their factories.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way, but yeah, I mean, what actually happens, right?
Overseer, office manager.
Right, yeah, who's in Detroit and Chicago and Akron work, right? I mean, you can't make this up, right? At every turning point, you know, who's doing the work? Yeah, I mean, fascinating stuff, but yeah, for sure. Like, I think I'm going to do more on this, but I just see it as that was a real invasion. Why that 500,000 people died, $14 trillion in debt. In today's dollars, 14 trillion. That's more than was in debt for Iraq, Afghanistan added together. Okay, this is how big time this war was. And you got to ask yourself, what was the big deal? Was it really because they wanted to free some poor savages from the jungles of Africa? Or was there maybe something more going on?
The North just loved them some Africans and wanted to see them free, even though there was still slaves up north and in certain border territories.
Or were they like, here is the last remnant, the southeast of the ancient culture. The indigenous are still holding on. It's like a compromised culture now by this point, but they had repudiated bank debts, Mississippi, Georgia, like 5 southern states just told like the Rothschilds, you know, and the Belmonts, we're not paying you. That was all the way back to the 1830s, right? So you got to put all that in perspective. Like they stiff-armed the biggest money guys in the world, right, on the way to this, and they're coming in and going, "Well, you know what? Since we can't get your sheriff to kick your asses out of the house, we got to have our own sheriff." So that.
Well, see, and this makes a lot of sense because when you look at the Reconstruction era, there were actually Confederate leaders that fled because they thought they would be executed. They thought that, you know, they were fighting a war against the Union. They thought they were going to be punished severely, and to their surprise, they got slaps on the wrist. Most of them came back, and you know what they did? Most Confederate leaders went into the insurance field and made buckets of money in insurance in the South. A whole bunch of industry. The Union just said, "Hey, you know what? We got what we wanted. We got your labor. We're now having the Freedmen's Bureau make labor contracts. We also got the Klan terrorizing some of these Black indigenous people to come up north and migrate. We got your labor. We got your system. So Confederates, you go back into the South, get some money in insurance. You're fine. It's all good."
Yeah. I mean, the whole Reconstruction is fascinating. I've done a lot of deep dive. I'm still learning a lot about it. I'll say this: what's really revealing is you can read these reports by the bureau agents. They write these reports to Washington, but they reveal they're being so honest, you know. And they're like, this is like year 2 after the war. They're like, so the only guys that really are farming productively that we can tax are the freedmen or the slaves. You know, so the whole thing is like, oh shoot, like we got to pay back a $14 trillion debt. Well, you got to sell a lot of corn and cotton. You know, who knows how to farm? What, the guy they're bringing in from, you know, Poland? You see what's going on? Yeah, crazy stuff. And I'm like, oh, this is like a gem. Like you can just read these reports. These guys are right, and you can really show you what was going on, man. It'll blow your mind. It's like, it's, you know, not what they tell you in conventional history at all. And then there's also the bad stuff with all the missionary. I mean, they're driving down on people. They're surveying.
Freedmen's Bank, all that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big surveillance state. They got the freedmen's on the Indians, right? And then all the white people they're bringing in, they're making them be a Methodist or a Baptist and go to church for it. It's a whole, you know, I read up, I was like, wild, like just, you got to control all these people.
Yeah. And then they basically had an agreement with all of these European settlers, because most people don't know there was a huge, massive wave of European immigration after the Civil War. Before the Civil War, there was a descendants of the colonists, the founding fathers, right? The British who rebelled. But after the Civil War is when the floodgates open and Ellis Island and all this kind of stuff. And they kind of had this unspoken rule with the new European settlers. Hey, we're going to give you some attractive land to farm. We're going to set you up nicely. We're going to give you farming colleges and grants and everything. But you know what you got to do? You have to maintain this racial hierarchy we instituted. You're not Irish no more. You're not Scottish. You're not Spanish. You're not Portuguese. You're white. And anyone who's not white is Black. And we must keep our foots on these Black people's necks.
Well, that's what I always say to people. It's like, again, just use a little thinking here, right? It's like, so they fought this war to free these guys, but then after that, they allow, you know, basically a paramilitary organization to terrorize them. They allow the Black codes, right? By the way, the Black codes were in all the northern states even before the Civil War. Ohio, all these guys. I mean, they never wanted free people of color in their states because they were the competition.
Before the Civil War, they had the Fugitive Slave Act, where they allowed Southerners to come into the North and take Black people, whether they were really a slave or not. That's how 12 Years a Slave and Solomon Northrop's story comes about. Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of, there's so much I'm trying to stay on the Reconstruction side of things. But yeah, I mean, after that, I feel like you can tell that the guys that knew how to get stuff, it just proves it out. Like they have to use them to like get the plantations going because they got to pay these debts back. So they got to sell products, and you see it in the reports. You see that also. I believe like that kind of shows up in Oklahoma and Tulsa, like you know, Tulsa rise so quickly. You know, it's like, okay, the group, they knew what the hell they were doing. Like, it's like they went out, you know, it's like, okay. So you
and don't get it twisted, guys. Slavery is not a good thing. Nobody's advocating for slavery. We're not saying, oh, slavery was really good when you think it's bad. What we're telling you is it was way more nuanced than they will ever teach us in school. And our ancestors were going to be free regardless. There was revolts, there was protests, there was rebellions. They were already loosening the reins in some degrees where they're letting slaves buy their freedom, buy their family's freedom, get integrated into society. I mean, and this is going on across the Americas. Look up the Caribbean. They do the same thing. This is a tale as old as time. The folks get oppressed real bad, they're enslaved, and then they start banging against the system, so they start getting concessions. And one of the earliest things is they go from straight up slavery to this kind of debt, peonage, wage-based slavery, where like now you have a labor contract and you're paid, but you're not really paid through currency, you're paid through product or part of the harvest, but then it's really sharecropping, and then you owe the master, and now you're a debt slave. And then when you bang against that, then you get a little bit more, and then you get a little bit more. And then 1950s, 1960s, we're advocating for civil rights, and then we get through that. But I say all that to say, the North, we did not need the North to free us. We were already on the path of freeing ourselves. There was a lot of people in the South who were free people of color during the peak of slavery, but they don't tell you about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, the slave system has definitely been over. I mean, it's like I said, I've read 2 books written by Northerners who are actually abolitionist propagandists, and like the book they wrote, they feel like they're telling you how bad slavery is. Okay, so they're really going down there for like 12 months, and they're trying to show us how horrible it is. And both of them never saw any type of whipping. None of them witnessed a slave market in the open. One of them talks about an indoor situation which reads like an employment agency where well-dressed slaves were waiting for their next assignment. I mean, literally, and this guy's, you know what his big issue was with the slaves, actually? You know what the real problem was with the slaves?
What's up?
They didn't work hard enough. Yeah.
They felt they were too idle, right?
How horrible was this situation when I've read 2 propagandist books written by Northern abolitionists who both say, yeah, we didn't see any of that violence. But you know what really agitates us about the South and the slave system? There's too much laying around, and there's too commingling of the race.
Well, you know, hold on. We're a little pressed for time, but I want to bring up a very interesting receipt to really cement the point that slavery is much more nuanced than they have ever taught us in school. You see, on my website, nativeblackancestry.com, I've actually built out a digital archive. And part of this digital archive are ex-Indigenous slave interviews. Check it out, guys. It's only $15 to access the digital archive. Go to nativeblackancestry.com. But when we go to ex-slave interviews, let me just read a couple pages of one real quick to show you how nuanced everything was. Check this out right here. Check this out. It says, and let me try to blow it up a little bit. It says, this is Ellen Cragen. She's interviewed about slavery. She says, I was born on the 10th of March in some year. I don't know what one. I don't know whether it was in the Civil War or before the Civil War. I forget it. I think that I was born in Vicksburg, Mississippi. I'm not sure, but I think it was. My mother was a great shouter. One night before I was born, she was at a meeting and she said, well, I'll have to go in. I feel something. She said I was walking about in there. And when she went in, I was born that same night. My mother was a great Christian woman. She raised us right. We had to be in at sundown. If you didn't bring it in at sundown, she'd whip you within an inch of your life. She didn't work in the field. She worked at a loom. She worked so long and so often that once she went to sleep at the loom. Her master's boy saw her and told his mother. His mother told him to take a whip and wear her out. He took a stick and went out to beat her awake. He beat my mother till she woke up. When she woke up, she took a pole out of the loom and beat him nearly to death with it. He hollered, don't beat me no more, and I won't let him whip you. She said, I'm gonna kill you. And guys, let's pause right there. This is the interview, the person being interviewed. This is their enslaved mother beating the master's child, threatening to kill the master's child. Check this out. Check this out. She said, I'm going to kill you. These black titties sucked you. And then you going to come out here and beat me. And when she left him, he wasn't able to walk. And that was the last time I seen her until after freedom. She went out and she got on an old cow that she used to milk called Dolly. That's what she called it. She rode away from the plantation because she knew they would kill her if she stayed. My mother was named Lavinia Polk. She got plumb away and stayed away. On account of that, I was raised by my mother. She went to Atchison, Kansas, rode all the way through them woods on a cow, tore her clothes all off on them bushes. Once a man stopped her and she said, my folks gone to Kansas and I don't know how to find them. So he told her just how to go. Now check this part out, guys. My father was an Indian. Way back in the dark days, his mother ran away. And when she came up, that's what she came up with, a little Indian boy. They called him Wahuchi. His master's name was Tom Polk. Tom Polk was my mother's master too. It was Tom Polk's boy that my mother beat up. My father wouldn't let nobody beat him either. One time when something he didn't suit Tom Polk, I don't know what it was, they cut sores on him that he died with. Cut him with a rawhide whip, you know, and then they took some salt and rubbed it into the sores. He told his master, you have took me down and beat me for nothing, and when you do it again, I'm going to put you in the ground. Papa never slept in the house again after that. They got scared, and he was scared of them, so he used to sleep in the woods. They used to call me Wahuchi and red-headed Indian brat. I got in a fight once with my mistress's daughter on account of that. The children used to say to me, they beat your papa yesterday. And I would say to them, they better not beat my papa. And they would go up in the house and tell it, and I would beat them for telling it. Damn. Our ancestors weren't these meek, servile people getting whipped and chained on plantations and not doing nothing about it. The mama got whipped awake, falling asleep at the loom. She whipped Massa's son damn near to death, then left on a cow. The father, the Indian man, the father took some lashes one time from the massa and said, you beat me for nothing, do it again, I'm going to put you in the ground. And the master and them was scared of him, and the father was scared, so he slept in the woods, neighboring the property. I mean, guys, is slavery not much more nuanced than they would ever teach us in school? But what do you think about this, Travis? Oh, I think we might have lost him. Oh, there he is. There he is. Go ahead.
Great stuff. I mean, yeah. So some observations that I read, right? So the guy's concerned about all the black and white kids like hanging out together, rolling around in the grass. Then he talks about the slaves having their little plot of land and taking stuff to market. Then he goes into the fact that, you know, they could do more work, as if basically they were so good at being on the timing and the seasonality of everything that they were so productive that they had plenty of time on their hands, is my point. And there's even complaints. You know, the Richmond newspaper complains about all the slaves are they're gambling, you know, too late into the night and spending too much of their money. I'm like, wait, that money?
Gambling and drinking and shit, right? And you're like, wait, slaves are making money and gambling and drinking and
expenses. So I was like, they were truly high on the hog. They had no expenses and they got paid cash money. So there's a whole side of it. And then if you doubt me, you can just go read legislation, and you can also read court reviews. There's entire books that review all the various court cases, and you see slaves winning all the time, getting inheritance, getting freed when they're wrongfully. So all kind. I mean, case after case is really wild.
Some of their masters would put in the will that when they pass away, their slaves get manumitted and get acreage. I mean, it was much more nuanced than you can ever imagine. But ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we've got to wrap up this broadcast. We're running short on time, but don't go anywhere. If you're watching live, YouTube is going to automatically push you into the next broadcast. And the next one, we're going to get into the war you never heard about, the Green Peach War. We'll see you guys in just a moment.
They don't want you to remember this. You not no slave, you indigenous. Fuck how they painted them Indians. You went to war with the French and the British, man. Quite frankly, you was kings, Merovingians. They took the women and men, made them prisoners, raised up the children to worship their images, set up a lab to the genes and they mixed them. And this shit get way deeper than your pigment.